So we're doing this sermon series called Fresh. It's has to do with New Year's, right? New Year's resolutions. It's like I'm going to refreshen myself. I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to work out to become stronger and better, and I'm going to refreshen my outlook on life, and it's going. I'm going to read more. We do all these things that we get 3 weeks into January, and we're like, bah! Like that's like I failed it again. It's like I'm going to diet this year, and then one of your friends has a birthday that happens to have cake at it, right? And you're like, oh, that diet's done. And no one else has ever struggled with that? Okay, I get it. I'm alone in my diet struggles, right? Yeah. That's what I thought. So that's we're looking at situations where so we're trying to find refreshingness, kind of a fresh outlook. But there are times in our lives where it seems like nothing good could happen out of this situation, right? There's nothing fresh about this situation. Have you ever been involved in a situation like that where there's nothing good that could come out of it? Like I had a friend, we'll call him Mr. Hill, because that was his name. And it's Mr. Hill is a Lutheran school teacher, and I think at this story, he was teaching fourth grade at the time, and he was in a Lutheran school. And to talk about his area a little bit, his area had a couple of interesting things. First off, it was a port town with a naval base there, so lots of Navy sailors all around and with their vices. And another thing that he had, which are interesting, and there aren't any of these here, is these little things, little pop-up coffee stands where they'll just lease out a small chunk of a big parking lot, and they can just have a drive-through coffee place like that. So they have these. So Mr. Hill he's a fourth grade teacher in a Lutheran school with all of that, and there was, and one of the talks of the school was about the coffee stand virtually across the street from the school, and it was, let's say, not family friendly. All right? Remember, this is a Navy town, popular with the Navy sailors, not family friendly. It was called Extreme Espresso. Started with an X, right? Like heavy on the X there. So you can only imagine what's going on there, and you can imagine it was the hubbub about the school. So Mr. Hill ended up getting in a car accident, and the insurance company says, hey, you're in luck. There's an auto body place virtually right across the street from the school. You can go there, and you can get this done. Some of you are seeing where this is going now, and so he's like, great. And so he goes, I can, after school's done. He didn't have his car for like a week, but when he picked it up, he could just walk right across the street, pick up his car, and that was what happened. After school one day, he walked across the street, pick up the car, and you never can just pick up the car, right? Like it's always like it's not quite ready yet, or the guy you need to talk to is nowhere. Like it's always auto body shops. You walk in and there's never anyone at that counter, right? Like that's just like, well, I need to get my car, and you're trying to track someone down. And he's kind of the same thing. And he got his car finally, and he goes to leave, and he would have left out of their entrance, but there was there was a truck blocking it. So he just went down to the next one, went through the parking lot of Extreme Espresso, and waited there. But just as he pulled up, an assembly was letting out at this Lutheran school that he was a teacher at, and all these people in the Suburbans and minivans were driving by, going over that. Yeah, no, and he's coming out of the parking lot. Can you imagine what happened the next day? It's like, Mr. Hill, will you please come to the principal's office? And the principal was like, why am I having tons of people calling me saying that they saw you coming out of the espresso place across the street, right? Sometimes it seems like nothing good can come out of a situation. Now, it all worked out. And this sermon isn't a sermon about, like you shouldn't judge someone that looks like they might be doing something, right? But that's not what this is about. But it's about sometimes where we get caught into circumstances where it looks like nothing fresh can come out of it. Nothing good can come out of that situation, right? Like our good old friend, Mr. Hill. And that's kind of what's going on with Jesus and the woman at the well. Because you remember this story, right? Jesus and his disciples, they come rolling into Samaria. They come across this well. There's a woman there, and Jesus starts talking to her, asks her to fetch some water, and they start talking about husbands, and Jesus is like, you've had 5, and the guy you're with now isn't your husband. And she then's like, oh my goodness, you're amazing, which is kind of an odd conversation. Like, you're amazing, like, you're an amazing dude, Jesus. And he starts talking about giving living water. Living water that you will never be thirsty again from. And that's what he's talking about. That's what this story is. But the truth is that this story is incredibly awkward and looks like a story where there's nothing good that can happen from it. And there's 4 reasons for this. There's 4 reasons for it. The first one is that it's in Samaria. Now, this is what you have to do. We have to click into a certain mode when we read the Bible and we hear about Samaria. You need to have just a guttural reaction that happens right away as soon as you think of Samaria. That you just need to go, boo, right? Like that's because they hated these people. So let's practice it. Like, and Jesus and disciples went to Samaria. There you go. Now you're getting it. Now you're getting it. Like, boo, like this. But like, we don't understand that because we're like, oh yeah, all these good Samaritans. They're people that get out of their cars and help people with flat tires, right? Like that's just what good Samaritans do. No, like they hated these people. They hated these people. While the Jewish people went and got exiled into Babylon, the Samaritans moved into the region and kind of inhabited their hometown, basically. They disliked them. Going from Galilee to Jerusalem, all right, they would go around Samaria. You could just go right through it, but they would go around because they couldn't handle it. I think the best way to express it today is if you live in the suburbs, there may be certain part of urban dwellings that you drive around, right? Because you don't want to be like Clark Griswold in Family Vacation, right? Some of you are like, what? Yeah, so you don't want to be like that, and so you go around it because, and the reason why you do it, and you're like, if I go down there, nothing good can happen in that place. So hey, they're in Samaria. Nothing good can happen out of Samaria. Point number 2, Jesus was a religious leader. He was a rabbi, right? He was a teacher. And in that day, you didn't go to women by yourself in that way. That was just a no-no. Something you would never do is go to another woman by himself. And if that happened, crazy gossip would ensue. Like, this is even still around today. I had a friend who worked at a church that in order for him to work at the church, he had to sign a document that said he would not be alone in a car with a married woman. Yeah. Like people are like, yeah, I've heard of that. Like that's over there, and gossip would ensue and all that. It made our lives incredibly difficult if we were trying to meet somewhere, and it's like because you couldn't just ride with Coley, So like that, this happened all the time. Like this was big in this day too. It's gossip. And how many of you would gossip if you saw me eating lunch or something like that with a lady who wasn't Coley, just a member of the church or something like that? We're like, you see that pastor over there? Like, what's going on there? And gossip, all of a sudden, I hear about it from not even someone in the church, like I'm getting gas. And they're like, oh, you had lunch with what's her name, didn't you? Like, we still do this. It's that same idea. So that's point number 2. Nothing good can happen from what's going on here. Number 3, the woman who Jesus is talking to isn't exactly the most wonderful, upstanding citizen, right? She's had 5 husbands, and the one she's with now isn't her husband, right? Like, it's just not good. It's not like she would be like this huge, like creating business deals and big person in society. And how do we know this? It's because she's at the well by herself. She's out there all by herself. There's no one else out there with her, and she's at it at a time in the heat of the day that when no one else would be at the well. Why is she going out there by herself? Maybe she's being ostracized from the community. It doesn't say, but you got to read between the lines. Maybe no one wants her around. Maybe she's been shunned to the corners. Nothing good can happen from this. And then the big one, point 4. This one's the big biblical glasses. You got to read it like the original readers would have read it and heard it. You got to do this. All right? They would have felt, as soon as they started reading this, they would have gotten real uncomfortable. Whoa, what's going on? Have you ever watched one of those movies or read a book and it just you were just uncomfortable. You couldn't sit still and you're moving around I don't like any of this, right? That is what would have been going on here, because this is around the same well as, and it's basically the same story that when Isaac, remember Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, when Isaac found his wife Rebekah. It's the same story. It's the same. They found Rebekah and they asked her to fetch water for them around this same well. Would have been super uncomfortable. They're like, is Jesus asking this woman to marry him? Is how they would have read this to begin with. We don't see that because we don't understand. We're like, oh, look, a woman around a well. I bet she's nice. She's a Samaritan. That's just how we look at it. And the original readers would have looked at it completely different. They would have been like, Samaritans, boo, this woman's dirty and you want to marry her? That's what they would have thought. Immediately on top of it. There's nothing good can come out of this situation. It's just like Mr. Hill sitting on the parking lot of Extreme Espresso, watching all the good Christian families drive by in the Suburbans, right? Nothing good can happen from this at all. And I think there's 2 different things that we can kind of get from this. We like to categorize. We like to categorize things. We like to have a stack for good and a stack for bad, right? We're like, and this thing is good here, and this is bad here, right? So whatever it is in our lives, we're like, I'm gonna stick this in the good stack, or I'm gonna stick this in the bad stack. So the original listeners, and hopefully you're doing this now too, you firmly stuck the woman at the well in the bad stack, because that's what they would have been doing. And the disciples that are with Jesus, you got them in the good stack, right? And then how you categorize yourself is also kind of interesting. We move around all the time that sometimes we feel in ourselves like we're that woman at the well. Because imagine how she feels. She's at that well by herself. She's had all these failed relationships. Right? There's a certain amount of shame that she is holding in herself. Now, this is all Cris conjecture on the text. I'm right. But it's not just coming out and saying it. But she has this, she has this shame. And what shame are you causing yourself in that's causing you to put yourself into the bad basket? Just causing yourself to go to the well in the middle of the day by yourself. Right? What is it? Is it some sexual thing that happened to you? Whether it's abuse or you abused it yourself. Is it some kind of addiction that you have that you feel shame and you just hold yourself and you're like, if I can just hide that, then no one else will put me in the bad basket and everyone will think I'm good, right? That's shame, and sometimes we put ourselves and we live in that shame of sin. We live in that shame of sin. That was mine, by the way, if you didn't hear that. We live in that shame of sin, and we don't believe that. But here's the thing. Here's the good news. Is that Jesus is there with that woman. And in the midst of your shame and sin and all those things, Jesus is there with you too. We're going to get more on that in a second. But then you have the good basket. Like you have like the disciples, right? And the disciples are like, yeah, Jesus, like that. Like we're following God and we're the Messiah. He's going to make us all powerful and we're going to be in charge of all of you later on. That's context clues from what they said later on in the Gospels, right? Like they're like, yeah, we're with the righteous one and all that. And things are good. And sometimes, and I'm not throwing myself in this basket at all here, we get a little judgy when it comes to our own righteousness, right? We get a little like, well, you can be, like, you really need to get your act together, right? You need to be more like me. Or we start looking at other people, or what we do is we separate our desire to be righteous, and we actually separate ourselves out from those sticky situations where Jesus actually may be working. We make sure that we're never around any weird Samaritan women that are around wells, right? So in order to stay nice and squeaky clean, we make sure of that. Or maybe we're working so hard in our own businesses or in our families or in church things even, doing good, righteous things, that we never actually look and see the stuff that's kind of sticky in odd situations, and we miss it all. And we miss it all. So let's look at the woman real quick, because she says this, like Jesus is talking to her and he's telling her everything about herself. And this is what's beautiful about this story. As the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming. He's going to call the Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, like, that's me. That's me. That's me. And she went away overjoyed. I mean, think about this. I've always heard that you can always tell when you have a real friend. A real friend is a person that knows all of your garbage and yet still hangs out with you, right? That's like a true friend. And we see that. That's what Jesus is doing with this woman. He's revealing all this. He knows all this about her. He knows all of her indiscretions. And yet he's still there. He's still there. And that overjoys her so much so that she goes to the town and goes, come see a man who told me all that I ever did. That's normally not a good thing. Like, there's a super judgy dude that knows a lot up at the corner, right? That's normally how that. But Jesus, because he's there and he's not judging, he's like, I'm still here with you, giving you living water. She goes to the town. He's like, he told me everything I ever did. Can this be the Christ? Like, that's exciting. You can tell that she's being refreshed by what Jesus is giving her, how he's accepting of her and telling her that her sins can be completely forgiven. And she starts bringing that refreshment to the town around her. All right, well, now we got to, and that's the cool thing about this, is that he knew everything about her, and yet he's still there. That's such a good thing. So let's talk about the disciples just for a second. I mean, think about them. So they're going into Samaria, and first off, you know they're like toddlers when Jesus is like, let's go through Samaria. They're like, come on, Jesus. And they're like, all right. And when you look kind of through the context clues of this, you can kind of see what their reaction is. Again, this is all Cris conjecture, but it's correct, okay? So what they probably did are like, all right, Jesus, go over by that well. We'll go into the town and get food. Don't talk to anybody, right? Like they'll corrupt you. We need you to stay pure, right? Like that's and so they go to the town to get food back, and we look at this first verse. So Jesus has just talked to the woman, and she's gone back to the town, and meanwhile the disciples were urging him, so they come back, hey, Rabbi, eat. And he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. That's a weird phrase, right? And they're like, did someone else bring him something to eat? Did they give him Samaritan food? And we need to get that out of you, Jesus, right? And Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me to accomplish his work. Here's the deal. if the Gospels really weren't about Jesus, the disciples wouldn't be just idiots the whole time. They wouldn't be just missing the point the whole time. If it was to follow the disciples' teaching, then they wouldn't have lines like this in the Gospels. Jesus is saying that he is there to do God's work, and he's basically saying that's why we've come in Samaria. See, the disciples, they just want to get through Samaria. They just want to get through the other side. They don't want to see, everything else. They're like, we'll just got to stop for food, and we got to get to Jerusalem. I don't care what we see along the ways. We just got to get to the other side. And Jesus is like, you guys need to stop for a second. And he says, you usually say, I'm going to paraphrase this, usually say, the harvest is coming. The end times are coming. That's when Jesus will do all of his great works, right? The end is coming. The harvest is coming. But I tell you, open up your eyes and see that the fields are ready for the harvest right now. Because by this time we see that the crowd of Samaritans has come out of the town and they are asking Jesus to stay another day with them. And the disciples are obviously like, let's just get moving. We got to get out of these Samaritan towns here. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's get out of here. You see that? And Jesus is like, look around. Yeah, this situation is weird and odd, and yeah, it looks like there's nothing good can come from it, but look at how this whole town is being refreshed because of this. You guys just want to skip through it, but stop for a second and look. This is ready to go right here. That's really cool. That's really cool. Sometimes when I stand here, I think nothing good can come from this. But it's the center of the stage, and I can't neglect it. But look, the field is ripe with harvest. So what's the point of all this? What's the point? I think we move around between feeling like we are complete failures in the bad basket and we live in our shame, and then sometimes we feel a little too self-righteous in ourselves. And what this story is that, the woman, Jesus, is there even in her complete dirtiness and insecurities. He is there. And that's how Jesus rolls. It's all these situations that that are just bad. Nothing good can happen from it. It's situation like that after situation. That's what the cross is, right? Yet in the cross we see that we are all brought to him, and none of us are forgotten about. Even the disciples who are a little self-righteous, none of them are forgotten about. And we're brought forward, and we know we have newness and freshness in his resurrection. So to close, just real quick, Jesus doesn't leave that woman alone, that she is refreshed in that. But the beautiful thing is also, is those disciples, even though their heads are in the clouds and they're just trying to get to Jerusalem, even though they're trying to get to where they're going over there, they're with Jesus, and they get to see the refreshment as well. So wherever you are today, maybe you need to slow down a little bit, and maybe you need to know that Jesus is there with you. But what we see from this story and from the cross and his resurrection is that Jesus is bringing that refreshment to us all. That you may know that you are not forgotten about and that he is here with you. And that's really good news, right? That's really good news. And we'll end right there. Let's say a prayer.